Today's guest on Mindful Leaders is John Hodian, composer, conductor, pianist, and founder of the Naghash Ensemble. Born and raised in Philadelphia to Armenian parents, John's grandparents were survivors of the Armenian Genocide from Kharpert. At the age of 12, John serendipitously discovered the piano, which opened the gateways to his career in music. He has written scores for many featured films and over 300 documentaries, earning international recognition and awards, including an Emmy. Soon after his first visit to Armenia, he discovered the poetry of a 15th century Armenian priest exiled from Dyarbekir, named Mkrtich Naghash, inspiring John to establish the famous Naghash Ensemble with a cycle of new music. In this segment, we explore John's life journey since leaving Philadelphia, the blessings that led him to discover Armenia, and the magic of Naghash Ensemble, which continues to extend a piece of Armenia to the world. John, what a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining me on Mindful Leaders.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. You know, over a month ago, I was actually an audience at the opera in Yerevan when Naghash Ensemble played. And I have to say, the music completely swept me off my feet. I mean, if people were to describe heaven and what heaven sounds like, I have to say it was the most spiritual and profound music that just transformed me. So I have to thank you for all that you do with Naghash.
That's really kind of you. Thank you very much.
So when I actually was there, the first thing I thought, and I told my husband, was, I have to find out who this person is who developed and who started Naghash. And so that's how I was introduced to you. And I just feel like when I do these conversations or have these conversations, I always want to get to know the internal compass of a person or of my guest. So to start off, can you tell me a little bit about the context of your childhood that would help me and our audience get to know you a little bit better? You know, what was your childhood environment like, your family environment like?
Well, I grew up in America, outside of Philadelphia. A very close-knit Armenian family. You know, all my parents' friends were Armenian. All the cultural touchstones were Armenian. Every record in my father's record collection was Armenian. So, you know, in fact, even my own father, he was born in America too, but when he went to elementary school for the first time, he didn't speak any English at all. So it was a very tight-knit kind of Armenian situation. That being said, I can't, it's funny hearing you describe the music as heavenly and all these things. I can't say that my childhood was that way. It wasn't bad. It was good. I came from a stable home and everything, but I always felt odd. I felt like I somehow didn't belong there. And I never knew what it was. Again, loving home and everything is just like, nah, this isn't where I belong. And to a certain extent, I feel like that has followed me around all of my life. And I don't know how much of that is a transgenerational thing of being the grandson of an Armenian genocide survivor. Yeah. You know, the disruption that my grandmother went through. You know, a lot of people say we carry that with us in our genes, and that might be it. Or maybe I was just a moody little kid. I don't know.
Well, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, talking about your grandmother, so this is your father's mother. Her name was Mariam.
Yes.
And obviously, you were still young when she passed away. And as far as you know, she never spoke of anything that happened in her childhood or growing up. So as a genocide survivor, she was from Kharpert, from a village called Perchendz.
Exactly.
And I actually looked that up
Good research.
Yeah, I looked that up, and it was interesting because I had to see how far she marched to Syria during the marches. So the story is, and I'm sure you can expand on that, is that she was already married with 3 children.
Right.
She had two
boys
sons
and a girl.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what happened to her?
Well, an unfortunately typical story. Her husband and her 2 sons were murdered by Turks right in front of her. She was forced to go on a march through the desert with her daughter. I'm not really sure how old her daughter was at the time. It wasn't a baby, but I would guess something like 9, 10, something like that. She was the youngest, the daughter. They ended up in a camp somewhere, and a guy came along, and I either knew her or was attracted to her and said, oh, this is my cousin. And if you were related, you were allowed to take the person out of the camp. And so he took her to, I believe, Paris first, and then they ended up in America, in Boston. When she got there, I think the gentleman wanted to marry her, but when they got there, she ran into somebody or somehow met somebody from her old village. That village thing is so tight, you know, it's so deeply rooted. She found a guy from that same village she grew up in, ended up marrying him instead, and having a whole new family in America. Lived another 50 years or so in America, and never learned a word of English, but gave birth to my father and 2 other children. So she was, very old when she passed away, and I was, I think, 9 or 10. But, you know, the memory of her is pretty clear.
Yeah, I think a lot of Armenians actually have a lot of unresolved issues, even generationally, you know, unresolved trauma, unresolved, emotions, even if we don't really know exactly the birthplace of you know, those emotions or those feelings. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about, you know, if growing up, I never knew my grandmother. I never heard from her stories, but thinking and hearing you tell these stories, you know, how much in you is there something that's been unresolved or that actually has been part of a carrying on or transmitted trauma?
I don't know where this comes from, but obviously that's a big piece of it. And it's always strikes me as so strange how all these things are this twist of fate, you know? Something happened, somebody ran this way, somebody else ran the other way. One person ends up in Beirut, the other person ends up in Los Angeles. One person ends up in the desert dying somewhere, the other person goes on to America and has a whole new life there.
Right.
You know, just because of some twist of fate that they happen to go one way one day, or they got caught, the other person didn't.
Right.
It's a crazy, crazy history. I mean, I know all ethnicities have an interesting history, but God, Armenians have a really interesting one.
Yeah. You know, you said twist of fate, and I can't help but think of all the blessings that have actually come into your life. I say that because you may not believe that, but I feel like you must be an incredible manifester. You know, you must be, you know, you just way of thinking. I look at your journey, so you never were in music. Your family, apart from the Armenian records, did not have anything classical or anything musically inclined.
No,
right?
They weren't particularly cultured, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I sometimes look at that and it's weird. And I think my being a rebellious teenager was to become that. But like, I never went to a play, I never went to a museum, I never went to a concert before I took myself to those things at age, 15, 16. But then whatever it was, I became voracious about all those things.
Right, but you're right in the sense where certain things took, when I say, for instance, twist of fate, I don't know if would you have gone into music or discovered it as soon as you did, had your parents not purchased a piano for your sister.
For my sister, not
right?
for me.
So she wanted to play piano, they purchased a piano for her.
Right.
When no one's around, you go and fiddle around with it, and then all the doors open.
It was that way, I was late. I started kind of late. We're talking like age 12 or 13, so it's not like I was a child prodigy or anything. But they brought in the piano, and I remember nobody was around, and it was in the living room, and there were the pianos there, and I just went, what's this now? And I just started plinking things, and I started making stuff up. And I'm just still making stuff up, basically. I mean, I got a pretty formal education too, but I can't imagine what would have happened if I don't think I was on a particularly good path. Like I said, I was not a happy kid. A bit of a delinquent, but certainly when the piano came into my life, everything changed pretty radically,
And so from that point on, apart from your musical career, eventually even teaching, and you moved to New York to compose scores for different films and TV shows, PBS, NBC, you name it. You were over, I saw 300
yeah,
different
I
movie.
wouldn't be surprised if
film.
that's some sort of crazy record of the score.
It is a
300 documentaries, actually.
Right.
And that's back when documentaries kind of meant a little something, you know, where there were PBS and kind of more interesting things. Not all of them were great, but I did a heck of a lot of them. I mean, first I had a fairly academic, you know, Western European classical music education. And then I taught for 3 years, taught composition and theory at a university. And I was kind of on that path, but I saw where that was headed, and it wasn't something I kind of loved it in the beginning because you get to create your own syllabus, you're working with young people and everything, but I knew this was not going to be my route. But it's not easy if you're a composer and you need to make a living. And we're talking about, you know, again, quasi-classical composer, and you're not going to be an academic, and you know, you want to sleep indoors, and you need to make some sort of a living. So yeah, I started scoring films and television, and that brought me to New York. And after a year or so of kind of struggling in New York, I did have some success. I did quite a bit there. And I did it for about 12 or 13 years, and it is like long hours in the studio, just kind of grinding these things out. And I reached a point where it's just one day I could not do it anymore. I just wasn't going to do it anymore. And because it's a wonderful thing, scoring music for films, but you're still always have the director or producer over your shoulder. You're trying to please them. You're trying to do what works for the film. There's so many constraints on it. And I just was done. And since then, I've never written any music for anybody else.
Right, right. Until you met Narek Hartunyan from Naregati.
Well,
who invites you to come to Armenia for the first time in 2005.
Right around that same time, exactly. Narek enters, somebody had introduced me to Narek, and you know, he's a guy, he runs the Naregati Art Institute. Very passionate, very charismatic, kind of a great Armenian guy. And he was doing all these amazing things there, like these books on komitas and all these CDs and wonderful artwork. So he meets me and says, oh, you know, I've been seeing your name all over the place. You should come to Armenia. Have you ever been to Armenia? It's like, yeah, that would be great. I'll do that sometime, but no. You know, I mean, it wasn't on
the bucket list.
Not at all. Yeah. I mean, maybe in some far, far thing, but no. But he said, great, why don't you come in 2 weeks? And I'm like, no, I can't do it. I've got all these things going on. But little twist of fate. This was when I was still scoring films, and those things are all very scheduled. You know, they have a deadline, you have to finish this, and you're working around. Something opened up, this film got pushed, and that week he was going, and I remember it was April, it was right around April 24 of 2005.
Right, the 90th anniversary of the genocide.
So there was a lot going on. And I saw what he was doing at Naregati Art Institute. I mean, first of all, like many diasporan Armenians coming here for the first time, I mean, you can't help but fall in love, you know, with the people, with everything. I mean, at that time, Armenia has changed a lot just in the 20 years that I've been here. But even from that first moment, it was just, again, because I grew up with all this Armenian stuff all around me, but it's a very Western Armenian background. So coming here and getting direct experiences of certain things, you know. For example, musically, most of the music I heard, there was a lot of kef music, party music and stuff like that. Church music, I knew what a duduk was, I knew what a kamancha was, but you don't hear them all the time, not in Philadelphia. Whereas here, and suddenly hearing all these great duduk players, kamancha players, you know, kanon players, it's like, it flipped me out. I mean, it was, to be honest, when I was young, because I grew up in this Armenian milieu, I didn't think it was that hip or something. I don't know what I thought was hip, but I didn't think it was that. And it wasn't until I came here and really started experiencing things at its source that I realized how hip it actually is. I mean, how by hip I mean deep, you know, with it, knowing something that a lot of other people don't know. There's a lot, here that was just completely knocking me out.
Did you feel like you actually found yourself? Because you were saying growing up you were not there, you're not with it, you were probably the oddball of the family because you just never felt like you were, I don't know, there was something missing and you knew that wasn't right.
Yeah.
Did you feel coming to Armenia like even though you never stepped foot in this part of the Armenia, the Eastern Armenia, what did you feel? What was that sense? Was it like coming home, even without knowing that you were home?
It is. I mean, it did feel a lot like coming home, and yet it was also very strange. I mean, I had the burden of I didn't really grow up speaking Armenian, so my Armenian still is very, very poor. So that's always been kind of a detriment. But again, it's the people. It's not even the land, and Yerevan's a great city, but it's not Paris, it's not Berlin, it's not New York, but the people are just so wonderful, and it's chaotic, especially then. There was a lot of chaos, but a lot of it was this kind of very beautiful chaos. And then some of the people that I met changed my life in a very
So I wanted to come
way.
thank you for raising that, because I do want to come up, when I say twist of fate or serendipity or blessings, it's as though everything was, when you trace all that you've been through, and then when you arrive to Armenia, I mean, having met Naghash, having him, encourage you to come to Armenia, you go to Garni Temple, discover your soprano, the person you stole, the voice that you stole, as you say, which was Hasmik Baldasarian, who gave you the inspiration to even start thinking about Naghash Ensemble. Am I correct?
That is correct. Yeah. Now, she has a very, very, very unique and amazingly beautiful voice. I mean, it's not an opera voice with that high, lots of vibrato, but it's not a folk voice either. It's kind of this very pure, very dark, extremely soulful voice. I heard it for the first time in Garni Temple. Hearing that voice in that, ringing in that surrounding, it's like, this is it. I mean, this is it. Yeah, composers are a little unethical. They might take a little of this and a little of that, but that was something. I told her that day, it's like, your voice is so beautiful. I'm going to write a piece for you, and we're going to do this, and we're going to tour all over the world, and I think she thought it was just
crazy,
totally bonkers. Yeah. But eventually, about 3 or 4 years later, I went back to her with stuff. It took a long time. It took a long time to find the right text. When I heard her, I knew what I wanted to do. And I knew I wasn't doing the film and television stuff anymore. I had the sound of her voice, especially in that space. And I knew what I wanted to do. I could just hear, music sometimes appears as like an energy. It's very indistinct, and you have to, it's kind of the way like sculptors talk about carving the thing out of this piece of clay. You hear something and but it's not exact. It's just, can be just a feeling or just kind of a blob of psychic energy or something. But I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And pretty clearly the sounds I wanted to use. I knew it was going to be like an ud and a duduk and a dol, and all that was clear. But what wasn't clear
was the text.
The text. What are the words going to be? You're working with singers. You have to have text. And that was hard because it was very important to me. One thing that doing films and television for all those years did is whenever I write music now, it has to be for something or about something. It's not, I don't think I'll ever do a piano sonata or a string quartet. I was so used to writing, oh, this is the story, or this is what's happening in that person's mind psychologically. So I needed that. Not only do I need the text because she's a singer, I need that text because that's a big part of the motivation. So I started reading everything I could. I started consulting with lots and lots of people, and nothing was quite right. Everyone said, "Oh, you should set Naghash," and it's like, yeah, it's beautiful, but it's not exactly what I'm looking for. There is this 3-volume set called The Heritage of Armenian Literature. You don't see it that often, but each volume is like really big. Are you familiar? Have you ever seen it?
I have to be honest with you, John. I looked to purchase or to find them, and I couldn't find them anywhere.
Oh, you can find you can even find them on Amazon.
I did. I looked.
Crazily rare.
Yeah. But there's a lot of information from all periods of of time of how Armenian literature evolved.
Yeah. Well, that's the wonderful thing about Armenian history, and especially growing up in America. You grew up in America, and it's like, this house is over 100 years old. It's amazing. And then, of course, I spent a lot of time touring in Europe, and it's like, oh, there's castles from the 1400s. Isn't that amazing? That's like here.
Yeah, seriously.
Like 5000 BC, Armenian Empire. It's like a whole deeper sense of history. And Armenians are very aware of that history in a very kind of sophisticated way. Anyway, these books, in the middle of this book was this fragment of text by this guy, a poet, also a priest and a painter, Mkrtich Naghash. And this fragment was about the concept of the garib, which is actually an Arabic word, but was used in that Middle Armenian for wanderer or exile. And he wrote this beautiful poem about what it's like to live your life in exile.
Yeah.
It completely resonated with me, as it would with many Armenians, but especially with me because I grew up in Philadelphia, moved to New York, moved to LA, lived in Berlin for a lot of years, and now was in Armenia. It's like, anyway, I did a lot more research, found out that this man had actually been forced to live in exile himself. He was a priest, had many, many followers. We're talking about the 1200s into the 1300s, where he was living, which outside of Dyarbekir. It was Muslim ruled, but there are Armenians there, but there are also, Jews and Arabs and everything. He built a church for his followers that had a steeple that was higher than any of the local mosques. You probably know where the story's going. It's still Muslim ruled. And they got along well with Naghash because they knew he was a leader of the people, but they said, you have to take that down.
And he
refused to take it down.
Yeah.
Went back and forth a little bit, but he didn't end up on the winning side of that argument, so he was forced out. Now again, we're talking about 1200s, 1300s. You don't book a flight through orbits. You go out and live in the desert somewhere. So anyway, he never saw his followers or his flock, or his family again. And all he left behind are these 15 poems. And it's kind of like these 15 poems sum up his whole relationship to God, his relationship to his previous parishioners. And they're really, really profound. And they were beautiful rhyming couplets because most likely that poetry was performed. Poetry then was very much an oratory art. They would recite, they would chant, maybe even sing. We don't know what it sounded like, but it was very rhythmic. The language was very inherently musical. That's why in some ways it was so beautifully easy in a way. I knew what I wanted the music to sound like. I had this text that was like wonderful rhythms and rhymes. It was like, just do the obvious thing, sort of.
Sort of. Well, this is interesting because a poet and a priest who had only 15 poems. I mean, you discovered and you brought into light this person and the poetry that probably was forgotten.
Totally. I mean, if you Google Naghash, Mkrtich Naghash, and you look at the Wikipedia article,
it's only about your ensemble.
It's about the ensemble.
It's about the ensemble.
No, even Armenian literary scholars. Yep. I mean, the good ones kind of knew who he was, but there's not a big. Again, he wasn't Sayat-Nova. He wasn't Frick. He wasn't. He wasn't one of the big ones.
But regardless, I mean, I'm just thinking. Did you feel like when you discovered this and you brought together this ensemble, knowing what it would sound like because you discovered Hasnik and then eventually the ensemble got together with the specific instruments, you have the words, did you think, I gotta bring this to the world? I gotta bring Armenian history, music, culture, anything ethnic related to Armenia's history has to be brought, was it a mission or it just kind of came intuitively? Because, I mean, I'm just thinking a lot of people, and I'm not talking only about musicians, anyone in any field, they always have this specific objective of what they wish to do and how they do it. It's like when you were writing film scores, right? You knew it was the objective is for that documentary or for that story. In this case, what did you do? Did you just follow the lead, follow your gut instinct? How does one do this? And what was the intention, if there was one?
Okay. First of all, whenever anybody asks me from now on, I'm going to tell that story the way you did. I'm going to say, yes, it was my mission to bring Armenian culture to the world. No. I was just doing what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I just knew I wanted to do this. I wanted to hear this. I mean, composers usually write music because they're not happy with the music they're hearing around them. They want to hear something very specific. I wanted to hear something very specific. And yet once I had done it, once I had gotten out of academia, once I had gotten out of film scoring, I was making my living as a touring composer. I had a different ensemble before this, and so truthfully, I put this music together, luckily found these amazing group of musicians. I mean, it's been the same ensemble since the very beginning, except
2012.
for one, my duduk player. I had to make a change because my duduk player went to LA. But it's been the same group of people for 13 years.
2012, I think you
the
started
first concert,
performing,
yeah. And it's a crazy amount of luck that they all really were certainly the best dol player, best oud player, best duduk player in Armenia. And then these voices, not only Hazmik's deep spiritual voice, Arpi alto is our alto. I mean, it's like really remarkable voice. And then Tatvik Movsesian, the country's kind of greatest interpreter of like new classical music. She just performed a concert of Mansuryan's works the other night. It was just haunting and beautiful.
So you say Mansuryan, and I can't help but think of what Tigran Mansuryan told you when you first gave him the first the disc or the CD, and he listened to it, and he said
that was very fortunate because I really was lucky. Coming here and doing all this stuff could have easily been interpreted as like, who's this guy from the outside? Because it's not necessarily pure Armenian music that I'm doing. I'm doing what is me. I mean, I grew up with in that kind of Armenian music that I heard in the household and in church and weddings and everything, but again, my background was very much Western classical music, but I grew up in Philadelphia. I mean, it's like a lot of Motown, later on a lot of hip hop, moved to New York, but then I worked with a lot of new classical music.
Right.
Philip Glass produced my first CD. It was kind of that second generation of American minimalist composers. So there's a lot of stuff in that stream, and I think it all comes out in the Naghash Ensemble. But I got off art.
The Tigran Mansuryan story.
Anyway, Tigran Mansuryan, most people know, is most dignified, wonderful, wonderful composer. A side story, he actually called me right before I came here.
You're kidding.
Yeah, but we'll tell that story later. Anyway, I knew him, I had been introduced to him, I didn't know him that well, but when I first was putting this music for the Naghash Ensemble together, I had made it like a test recording. I'm trying to see what we're doing, and I gave him this recording on a CD, just a little test mix. And so he thanked me for it. And the next day, I get a call from his assistant. Now, he doesn't speak any English, and my Armenian's not good, as you know. And his assistant's kind of all business. And he said, Mr. Mansuryan wants to meet you. You should be at the Parisian Cafe at 3 o'clock tomorrow. I was like, oh, okay. I thought I was it sounded like I was going to the principal's office, because he's such an Armenian hero. And it's like, I didn't know what he was going to say. It's like, how dare you come here and take all our good musicians or anything. So I come there and I meet him and he stands up. And again, he's such a dignified, wonderful guy. And he takes the CD out of his pocket and he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, this is like the sound of ancient Cilicia, but reinterpreted for the future. It was actually even more haunting it's not the exact quote, but it's something like that. And it was just, God, thank you so much. And so coming from him, that was a great confirmation.
Did that confirm your identity as an Armenian?
Well, you know what was another thing that happened literally within a day or two of that? We did one of our first concerts here, okay? And a little old lady came up, real old Armenian lady, looked like she was a village person, but it was in Yerevan. She comes up to me after the concert and she goes, oh, thank you so much for keeping all the old folk songs alive. And I just said, sure, no problem. But there were no Armenian folk songs in the music. It was just the music I write for the Naghash, but it does sound Armenian somehow. That's not a conscious thing on I don't try and make it sound Armenian or anything. I just do what I want.
But if Tigran Mansuryan is actually telling you this, it kind of, it probably validates a lot of emotions that you had or had dismissed before of not knowing who you were, or am I accepted here in Armenia, and
was accepted very much, not only by him, by that little old lady, but by the ensemble as well. Yeah. I mean, they really took to the music, and it was challenging for them. It's not what they're used to doing.
Every time I think about that, I always think, I remember you asking me, we're doing a conversation on mindful leaders, but I'm not a leader. What do you expect? And I think of this as that there's this stereotype of what a leader looks like or resembles. The stereotype is the title, the authority, this image. Whereas I actually think that a leader is based on how he or she is able to stir certain things in other people and really help them find their true gift and potential for them to fly. And I feel that's what you did with these 7 or 8 people in the ensemble, where I think perhaps you've enabled them to discover things that they never knew they had in terms of talent, whether it's with instrument or voice. So I actually think that you are, in your own right, your own leader, and not in the stereotypical way, obviously. What do you think about that?
One of the things that happened with the ensemble, I mean, again, I come from grew up in Philadelphia, but moved to New York, so I think of myself mostly as a New Yorker. The way you do concerts in New York is you get the best people you can find. Everybody shows up for a rehearsal, but they already know the music. I mean, you are on it. You have the best musicians in the world. You do 2 or 3 rehearsals, you do the concert. That's what I thought I was going to do here. But here, things are done very differently. People show up late. People maybe haven't looked at the music. And it was like, no, John, it's Armenian style. Yeah. Well, very interesting thing about Armenians. I had this revelation at the concert you were at. After that concert that night, my friend James Tufenkian had a little reception for me. And I was kind of so touched by everybody who was there. Because I was looking around, and there was my soprano, Hasmik Bagdasarian, the most beautiful, soulful voice in the world. There was James Tufenkian, the man who's built these incredible hotels, brilliant businessman, just great. He's a real leader. Tigran Mansuryan, who was the man who asked me to do a concert at the opera. He's
the director of the opera.
New director, relatively new, 2 or 3 years, radically changing everything that's going on at the opera. Really, I mean, that opera's been doing the same pieces for, 30, 40 years, really shaking things up. Sona Hovhannisyan was there, a woman who brings all these great musicians to Armenia for the first time. And I was just thinking no, this is Armenian style. Because they always say Armenian style is when things screw up, when people are late, when everything's chaos. Oh, it's Armenian style, ha, ha, ha. It's I never thought that was all that funny. Yeah. This is Armenian style. Yeah. Tigran Mansuryan, James Tufenkian, Hasmik Bagdasarian, my manager, Vipa Zolman, who's put us on the map in Europe. This is Armenian. This is the new Armenian style.
You have unknowingly or knowingly mentored many people, young people, and they look up to you, or even without you knowing it, you're a source of inspiration on many levels. I'm just curious to know, have you actually thought of yourself as a source of hope to people? That, and I know you're very humble and you're very modest. My point is, what is the message that you feel you should be giving to the newer generations, about how to live a life to the fullest under these conditions?
It's really hard. Some members in my ensemble have young sons, and they have to make a decision. Those kids are going to go to war. They're going to go in the service. It's mandatory here, as you know. Pray that that's not during a time of war, but that is a possibility. So I can't tell anybody how they should live their life, whether they should stay here or go. Especially when I first came here, things were very, very different than they are now. And a lot of times people would say, I really want to get to Europe. I want to study with so-and-so. I want to learn more of this. But then things were changed. So much has changed in the past 20, even before the revolution and the war. Good things, good change. I mean, things that have been built and done in Armenia as a kind of a tech hub and artistically, so much growth and so much wonderful stuff. It's like, no, don't go anywhere. I mean, if you go somewhere, you're going to be just another composer of thousands of composers or poets. It's so hard to be an artist in the world. In Armenia, it's a little bit easier. And because it's treated with a great deal of respect, In America, you say, oh, I'm going to be an artist. I'm not talking about a pop star, like a abstract painter or an avant-garde poet. It's like, good luck, buddy. But here you're still taken seriously as an artist. Again, I don't think I'm answering your question. What the heck was your question?
No, I think we got to the point. I mean,
about hope and I can't say to somebody, no, stay here, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know, but I'm not going anywhere. But I still have my American passport, and I'm lucky to have it.
Exactly. John, thank you so much for being here. I think you actually, with your music, you don't have to say anything, bring so much sense of hope that we're always creating. We're a nation of creators, of builders, and we're able to, from nothing, I mean, you coming and discovering a voice and the poetry and history and all that together, you're able to bring something so spiritual and so transformative. And I just want to thank you for all that you do. I can't wait to attend your next concert because I'll just close my eyes and listen to the music and feel like I'm transposed to another world.
Oh, that's really sweet, Laura. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.